Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined on this Thursday morning by Andrew Erickson and Pat Fitzmaurice. It's the Week 14 Start or Sit show. We are essentially the last week of the regular season for most leagues. Some leagues do start their playoffs this week, which is unfortunate with 6 teams on bye. Some weeks, maybe depending on how you do it, might have an extra week until the playoffs if you've only got 4 teams in the playoffs. But for most people, this is the week to clinch your playoff spot. Erickson, are you set up to be very active in the fantasy playoffs this year, or are you going to be eliminated in a lot of places?
No, I mean, I'm in a couple tough spots where 7-6 on the right on the outside with basically 5 other 7-6 teams that are trying to like punch their ticket into the playoffs. So I'm going to have some teams in the running, I think, going to next week. I like some of the spots I have. I just think that it really puts fantasy managers in an interesting and tough position this week because of all the teams on bye week. So it's funny because you think, well, you've had these players for all 13 weeks. You'd think that you'd have a better record than 7-6, but it comes to like players like the Texans, for example. Like I've had a CJ Stroud stack in Superflex that has crawled its way to a 7-6 record with Nico Collins and Tank Dell. So obviously I'm not happy that I don't have them this week. I'm also not super disappointed because I can play other players instead of Stroud and Tank Dell. So yeah, it'll be a fun week for sure. A lot of fun matchups on the slate, and I'm happy to break it down with you boys.
Yeah, those players who are week in and week out disappointing, but they never actually get hurt are sometimes like the worst in fantasy because you don't get the option to just cut them or put them on IR. You are rolling them out there every single week and they're just killing you right and left. So I suppose I have Stroud in a lot of places too, mostly in my dynasty leagues. It is like kind of a nice respite to be like, you know what? There's no world I'm starting him this week, finally. Fitz, how about you? How many matchups do you have that are winning in for week 14 here?
Week 13 was kind of a more consequential week for me, and I actually had a pretty good week 13 and clinched some playoff spots then. So there's not a lot riding on it for me this week. I do have a key matchup in one of my home leagues against one of my best friends that's going to determine a playoff bye. And then Worm, we've got the Scott Fishbowl playoffs. And the bye-apocalypse is absolutely wrecking me. I'm probably going to be starting a lot of kick returners and kickers this week in the Scott Fishbowl.
Yeah, Fitz, myself, and Mayor are the remaining Fantasy Pros representatives in the Scott Fishbowl as we head into round 3. I'm not too hit by bye weeks in that league. I got a couple. Everybody's going to have a couple players, but I managed to avoid the worst. Really, the most consequential for me this week is I have a league where I want to lose, and I can lock up the second pick in the draft for rookie drafts next year. If I win, I'm probably going to be picking 4th. So I consider that to be quite consequential for me, perhaps even more so than making the playoffs in some of these redraft leagues. This is our Thursday show. Quick reminder, all of our weekly consensus rankings and tiers can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. Fellas, let's dive in with the guys that we picked up on waivers this week. Are we starting or sitting them in week 14? We'll start with the obvious biggest waiver wire darling of the week. It's Isaac Guerendo. Fitz, you do a lot of our, waiver wire coverage. He was a very clear number 1 across the board. We've talked about some of the earlier shows this week. This is the type of guy you completely empty your fab for him. Whatever you have left, spend 100%. Are you starting him right away in week 1?
Yeah, if you
drain, week 14, I should say, but week 1 for him.
If you drain the fab account, you better well be starting him this week against the Bears. And I have him ranked inside the top 10. I do believe I have him ranked RB10 against the Bears run defense that ranks 30th in DVOA and has given up the 10th most fantasy points to running backs. Like, he's a good bet for 15 to 20 carries. And maybe the offensive machinery is not humming along as smoothly as it was earlier in the season for the 49ers. And you've got the shoulder issue with Brock Purdy. Trent Williams hasn't been playing, their star left tackle. So those are concerns, but just we should get the volume, and we like the matchup with Guerendo full steam ahead.
Erickson, what do you think hearing that top 10 running back for Fitz?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that high on Guerendo, but I think that he needs to be started. And maybe I need to reassess where I have Guerendo ranked not high. And again, I thought I had him inside the top 20. I thought, okay, yeah, this looks good. Like, this is aggressive on him, but clearly not. But I don't think we need to overthink this. And the only concern we have is, okay, what will the touch projection be? Well, Guerendo's one of these players where he could get 10 carries and he could still go over 100 yards, right? Because he's this size, speed, explosive running back that can deliver on limited touches. We've already seen him do it this year. All he's needed is 10 carries. He's gone over 89 rushing yards in those 2 games. So yeah, even if the touches don't necessarily work in our favor and they involve some of these other jabronis, Patrick Taylor or Israel Abanikanda, the guy they added from the Jets practice squad, it may not matter because he's an explosive running back and it's a good matchup. So yeah, full steam ahead with Isaac Guerendo.
He's RB15 in ECR. You guys are kind of on either extreme end of that with Fitz up at RB10 and Erickson down RB20. But either way, we all agree he's definitely a start. Just had to mention him because we talk about waiver guys in this segment. And we really we've actually kind of been complaining about this, Fitz, how few good options there have been as the kind of immediate pickup off the waiver wire, insert into your starting lineup options there have been this season. And Guerendo is really one of the first, in a while, it feels like, guys of that nature. So not really controversial. We're all starting him in week 14. How about Kimani Vidal, Erickson? Is he somebody, we saw kind of the first iteration of the J.K. Dobbins-less backfield for the Chargers. Now they get the Chiefs. Is Vidal somebody you're considering starting this week?
Not unless I'm really desperate. I think that it's still a committee with him and Gus Edwards. I think that he's definitely the more explosive of those two running backs, but I just have general concerns about the Chargers offense in general. Like Ladd McConkey is banged up, and if he's not getting involved, like how are they moving the ball? Like that is a big concern for me with Justin Herbert in this offense. I mean, they were teed up to smash against the Falcons, and they didn't move the ball on the Atlanta Falcons defense. So that is concern. They're playing the Chiefs on the road. I know the Chiefs defense hasn't been as great over the last couple of weeks, but I didn't see enough quietly from Vidal to say, oh, I'm super confident he's going to take over this backfield. He's going to get all the goal line touches. I know last week, when you look at just the raw touches, it's really underwhelming for Vidal, but the Chargers offense just in general didn't run many plays because Kirk Cousins kept picking off the ball. They had pick sixes, so the Falcons ran a lot of plays where, Gus Edwards only had 6 carries where Vidal had 4, right? So in the percentage of backfield touches, it was actually pretty good in favor of Vidal looking at him projecting forward, but maybe he gets up to 10 total touches in this matchup. Again, it's still not great against the Chiefs, even though the Raiders were able to run the ball a little bit last week. So I think there's probably better options than Vidal that you can find this week. And we also still don't know, he got a goal line carry or a red zone carry last week, but do they go back to Gus Edwards in that role? So I just think that there are probably better options this week than Vidal.
Fitz, where are you ranking Vidal?
I've got him at running back 40 or something like that. I just don't like the matchup against the Chiefs. They've been tough on running backs all season long. And even though Vidal should get more work because he's got more juice than Gus Edwards, we're not guaranteed more than a handful of carries with him. I don't know if they trust him in pass protection. There's a scenario where he only gets 3 or 4 carries. And, there's serious risk to starting Kimani Vidal.
One more here, Fitz. Will Dissly, tight end, also on the Chargers, still not very rostered, at least, not on Yahoo and ESPN. We've got the roster percentages for players on the FantasyPros kind of profile page for these guys. 2% on Yahoo, 34% on ESPN rostered, so much more on ESPN, but still not even up to 50%. Yet he's ranked inside the top 12 in ECR. So is he somebody that you're starting at tight end this week?
Yeah, he's stream worthy. I've got him at tight end 12. The Chiefs have given up the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends. And as Erickson alluded to earlier, Ladd McConkey not fully healthy. I'll be moving up Dissly if McConkey doesn't play, and we know in advance that he's not going to play on Sunday night. And plus, we've got Quentin Johnston kind of backsliding into 2023 Quentin Johnston, unfortunately. So, yeah, I think Dissly's going to get some targets this week, and he's going to get a lot of targets if Ladd McConkey's out.
Erickson?
Wait, Fitz, are you telling me that Quentin Johnston's not your flag plant this week?
Yeah, first time in like a month.
We're not going to go 3 in a row. We're quitting.
So for me, I love Dissly this week. I get that he bombed. He had 1 target last week and no catches, right? So I think that's kind of keeping his roster percentage down because, this guy did nothing last week. But as I pointed out with the Chargers offense, they just didn't run enough plays. There was no volume from the Chargers offense last week because they never had the ball. So I expect his targets to go way up where he's really been more the last couple of weeks, 4, 6, 6, 3, 7, 11. So he's had games where he's been hyper-targeted by Justin Herbert. And if McConkey is not available, then he's going to see a lot of volume, and it's a good matchup for him against the Chiefs. We just saw, again, he's not Brock Bowers by any way, shape, or form, but the Chiefs have given up a lot to tight ends, and their defense has been leaky overall over the last couple weeks. So I really like Will Dissly. I have him inside my top 10.
Let's plant our flag. Fitz says it won't be Quentin Johnston. Who will it be for you?
Yeah, by the way, you could not have had a better flag plant and a worse flag plant than Erickson and I. I had Quentin Johnston. Erickson, who did you have last week?
Bucky Irving.
Not bad. Not bad. All right, so I've got some catching up to do. I'm going to go with Tyrone Tracy. I know he has had some fumbling issues lately, but I'm a big believer in Tyrone Tracy's talent. The Saints' run defense, which he'll be facing this weekend, is bad news, and I think Brian Dable is going to want to hide Drew Lock as much as humanly possible.
Erickson, what do you think about Tracy? Somebody you've obviously been very high on for a while.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of a scare on Thanksgiving when Devin Singletary ran out with the starters, and oh no, he's lost the backfield. But then right after that, he took over and it was like, all right, he's back. He's back in the starting role. Look, this Saints-Giants game has so many makings of something that could be totally gross. But the one thing that we know is that these two defenses, like, they can't tackle, they can't stop the run. And Tyrone Tracy is really like the only hope of this Giants offense really moving the ball effectively with the quarterbacks that they currently have on the roster. So I like Tyrone Tracy a lot.
Erickson, who is the guy you are planting your flag on?
I'm going with Amari Cooper this week. I think that Cooper, he's just overdue, man. He's overdue to one of these monster 30-point games that kind of comes out of nowhere because this is just his MO with Amari Cooper. And when you look at the matchup, they're playing the Rams in a dome. Like, this is a spot where Amari Cooper usually blows up, right? And we're all kind of least expecting, and he's in the 36s outside the top 30 in ECR because he hasn't done anything, but he really hasn't had the chances to do so. Last week was obviously in the snow. He's had the wrist injury I think I flag planned him a couple weeks ago, and he didn't even end up playing in that game. Keon Coleman's also coming back from a wrist injury. So I know Deebo likes Amari Cooper a lot this week. He kind of pointed out last week in the first half, Cooper's overall route share was really high. So we're starting to see him getting more integrated into the offense with Buffalo. He's been a full participant at practice. So I think that he's finally over this wrist injury, whereas Keon Coleman is still limited. Even if Keon Coleman plays, I still think Amari Cooper will probably be the route leader if it's not Khalil Shakir. And the Rams, they're 31st in EPA per attempt on deep passes. Like, if you need a big upside play, a big upside swing, I think it's Amari Cooper this week. And I have him in a bunch of spots. Never really feel comfortable playing him. Put him in your lineup this week. I think that he's going to deliver one of these marquee Amari Cooper games right when you need it in the fantasy football playoffs coming up.
Fitz, what do you think about this one? I've actually got plans for us to talk a little bit about Amari Cooper in our Key Questions show that we're taping tomorrow. But for the sake of this show and the folks who are only listening to this one, is Cooper somebody that you think is worth, like, Erickson planting his flag on him, kind of going back to the well, given what he's done this year and specifically since going to Buffalo?
Longtime Amari Cooper fan here. But yeah, it's just really hard to predict. Erickson is right that he's overdue, and we get these unpredictable smash games from Amari Cooper that you just don't see coming, and all of a sudden he has the 230-yard, 2-touchdown game. So I'd like to think so. I don't know. The target counts have not been what we wanted or expected, I think, going to Buffalo. And part of it is sometimes the Bills just like to run the crap out of the ball. And, they've got some other good pass catchers now with Shakir. I think they're getting Keon Coleman back from his wrist injury this week. So I just don't know what it's going to be like. Your guess is as good as mine about what Amari Cooper is going to do. I can't boldly predict a big game, but I certainly wouldn't be shocked because he is a fantastic receiver. Like, sometimes you just have to bet on the good players rather than the guys who maybe aren't as good of players and have been putting up good numbers, like the Nick Westbrook-Akines of the world.
Wide receiver 70 since going to Buffalo. And that's not in total points. That's points per game for fantasy scoring. So it could hardly have been much worse outside of that early touchdown he got in that first game. I would love to see him bounce back, though. He's a player I've certainly enjoyed watching and I thought was going to really take off as Josh Allen's top target once that trade was made. The NFL season is rolling along and the contenders are separating from the pack. The one thing that hasn't changed this season, DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, is the number one place to bet touchdowns. Fade to the corner of the end zone, running back breaks through the line and gallops 60 yards to score. We don't care how they get them. We want to bet on touchdowns, and DraftKings is the best place to do it. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like a player scoring a touchdown. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. Tons of teams on bye in Week 14, 6 of them actually. Tons of big spreads in the games we do get. but there is at least one standout matchup on Sunday Night Football with the Chargers in Kansas City. Chiefs laying 4 points at home against Justin Herbert and company. Should be a super fun matchup. Odds and lines are subject to change in that game, but whichever game you do bet, here's a reason for new customers to do a touchdown dance of their own. Bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the number one place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FANTASYPROS. That's code FANTASYPROS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, guys, let's get into our start-sit player debates. We will start, as always, with some running backs. How about this one, Erickson? Isiah Pacheco or Rachaad White in Week 14?
I'm going to do, if Bucky Irving plays, then I'm going to go with Isiah Pacheco, because Bucky Irving opened the injury report this week with the DNP because he's dealing with a hip injury. So if he's not going to play, I'm just going to chase a lot of volume I think we could see with Rachaad White. But if not, Isiah Pacheco, right? I know that he's in a committee with Kareem Hunt, but even if Pacheco isn't all the way back, I know that he did rip off one explosive run last week against the Raiders. He's still going to be more explosive than Kareem Hunt. Pretty much any other running back is more explosive than Kareem Hunt. So even if Pacheco's not fully back to prime Pacheco before his leg injury, he's still the most explosive back on the Kansas City Chiefs. And the Chargers don't really stack the box, so I think you could see some opportunities for some decent volume. I don't think that Pacheco's ever going to be like a smash at any point, because I just don't think the Chiefs want to overload him, because they're looking at the postseason. They know that he's coming off a major injury and they have other running backs that they can use. So, but for me, I think it comes down to, yes, if Bucky is active, then I want to go with Pacheco. If Bucky's out, then I think you just follow the touches and the volume with Rachaad White.
Fitz, what do you think?
I'll go with White, even if Bucky Irving does play. And I have White ranked as if Bucky is going to play. And right now I've got White RB23 and Pacheco RB24. So I do think it's pretty close to being in the coin flip zone. The biggest variable here is Pacheco's workload. So in his first game back from injury, he played 39% of the offensive snaps and had 7 carries for 44 yards, 1 catch for 5 yards in the Black Friday win over the Raiders. That's 8 touches. Rachaad White has generally been around 12 touches a game, give or take. And he has an easier matchup. It's White against the Raiders, Pacheco against the Chargers. The question is whether Pacheco takes like a quantum leap forward in terms of his workload, or if it's more of a baby step. And my concern is that since the Chiefs are 11-1, they can afford to manage Pacheco's workload pretty judiciously. So I think it's no better than 50-50 that Pacheco gets as many touches as Rachaad White. And again, White does have the easier matchup this week.
Yeah, what was your concern level, Fitz, just in seeing like he split carries with Kareem Hunt, only had 7 touches in that game against the Raiders? Are you kind of more willing to brush that off as it was just first game back and shaking off the rust, or did that give you any cause for concern, or maybe even think that, you know, Kareem Hunt is worth holding on to?
I mean, I figured it might take like 3 weeks before Pacheco was fully up to speed and like the guy for the Chiefs again. And 3 weeks puts us in the first round of the fantasy playoffs. And, hopefully you're not leaning on Pacheco too heavily this week to get into the fantasy playoffs, because I think it's wheels up from week 15 on. It could be wheels up this week. I just don't know. We could still see a lot of Kareem Hunt, or at least more than Pacheco investors would like to see.
We've got another running back debate here. DeAndre Swift or Chuba Hubbard? Fitz, I'll start with you on this one.
I'm going to go with Chuba. So Swift has a quad injury, didn't practice on Wednesday. Normally a missed practice on Wednesday wouldn't be that big a deal, but we had the Bears playing on Thanksgiving. So it is 6 days after their last game instead of the typical 3 days after their last game. And for him to not being practicing, I think is kind of more concerning in this case than it would be otherwise. So I'm still ranking Swift as if he'll play, and I've got him a couple spots behind Chuba. I also have Chuba ranked 1 spot ahead of Najee Harris for what it's worth. So Swift does have a better matchup, goes against the 49ers. They rank 24th in DVOA against the run and have given up the 7th most points to running backs. Hubbard faces an Eagles defense that is 5th in DVOA against the run, has allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to running backs. Tough matchup for Hubbard, no question. I do think there's also concern that Jonathan Brooks got some touches last week. I think 8 touches. But as far as snaps, Hubbard outsnapped Jonathan Brooks 55-15. So Hubbard's 69% snap share was pretty much right in line with the snap share he's had all season long. I still think he's the main man in the Carolina backfield. And even though it's a difficult matchup, he can do it as a pass catcher. He can do it as a runner. And he's healthier than DeAndre Swift right now. So I'm going with Chuba here.
Yeah, what do you think, Erickson? Jonathan Brooks, he actually had 9 touches, 6 carries, and 3 catches just on that limited snap count. What do you think about this head-to-head here?
I like Swift. I mean, assuming that he plays, because the other injury that is in the Bears' backfield is Roschon Johnson. So he has a concussion. He also didn't practice on Wednesday, but he's had concussions before. He missed a ton of games last year with a concussion. So of the likelihood of these Bears running backs, I think Roschon Johnson is definitely not going to play. And if that's putting Swift into a full workload where Travis Homer is like the next Bears running back that they're going to use, they don't use him. So I think Swift would see a ton of volume and a ton of work. So I would prefer him versus Hubbard, where I'm concerned about Hubbard, even though, yes, he saw the majority of snaps. Well, the yardage totals were almost the same as Jonathan Brooks, despite Brooks seeing so many fewer touches and not involved as much as a pass catcher. Saw Brooks take a bigger step there. And the one drive where Jonathan Brooks got a ton of usage was in the red zone. Like 5 of his 9 touches overall came on a red zone drive where the Carolina Panthers got into the red zone because of a Baker Mayfield turnover. So if they get into the red zone, I'm confident that it will be Chuba Hubbard in there, because it seemed like it was like their mission to get Jonathan Brooks a touchdown because they used him so much on that particular drive. And the other thing too is Hubbard fumbled in overtime, right? Does he get disciplined in any way? Because, hey, that was a close game. That's a game the Panthers could have won, and he fumbled. So again, I don't think that will be the case, but I was impressed by what Brooks saw, and I think that the high value touches that he's eating into, not even if it's just the general snaps, I think that might affect Hubbard. And like Fitz pointed out, it's not like the matchup is, this can bail Chuba Hubbard out. I'm not so sure about that. So I will ride it with DeAndre Swift, assuming he plays.
Erickson, let's stick with you for a wide receiver debate here. How about Calvin Ridley? A lot of people talking about that revenge game narrative, or Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who's been playing really well lately.
Yeah, this one's tough because I think you got to be, again, every time you bring up JSN, it's like you should be starting JSN pretty much every week, no matter what. But the Jaguars defense is just it's so bad. Like, if you're ever going to play Calvin Ridley, like, you have to play him in this spot. Again, not even bringing up like the revenge game narrative. I know that Chris or Welsh talked about it on the show that we did with the predictions and how Calvin Ridley was going to have a monster game. But I mean, this Jaguars defense is like historically bad. So looking back at the next gen stats era, basically, they're the worst defense in terms of EPA per dropback allowed since the 2020 Detroit Lions. Like a laughable defense. Like, that is the secondary that Calvin Ridley is facing. And given that he's been kind of, fallen to the wayside a little bit in terms of actual production the last couple of weeks, where Nick Westbrook-Akine has kind of taken on a larger role, I mean, eventually you're going to see these targets and air yards convert into actual production. And this kind of seems like, hey, this is like the obvious buy low spot for Calvin Ridley against a horrible Jaguars defense. So as consistent as JSN has been, and as good as he was even in this game that he played a couple weeks ago against the Arizona Cardinals, the Cardinals kind of kept him in check for most of the game. He had a 46-yard catch and run play that kind of helped him get the majority of his numbers. Overall in the year, the Cardinals have been pretty strong against slot receivers, so I don't want to overread into that particular stat line, whereas Ridley, he's just set up so well here. So again, you don't ever feel really super confident riding Calvin Ridley with Will Levis, but I think this is the week you got to play him. So I'm going to go with Ridley.
What do you think, Fitz? I mean, again, Ridley's somebody that everybody's really excited about, but JSN has just been, really stepping into his own and just breaking out kind of in a way that we haven't seen since he was in college in the last few weeks. Last 4 games, 180 yards, 110 yards, 77 yards, 74 yards. He's got 3 touchdowns in that span. Week before that was 6 catches, 69 yards. So, it's really been several weeks here of playing pretty well, even with DK Metcalf back. But would you play him over Calvin Ridley?
Yeah, it's been a really fun breakout for JSN, and I've got him ranked wide receiver 19, but I'm with Erickson here. I've Ridley ranked wide receiver 13, and just to drill down a little more on what a good matchup the Jaguars are for opposing wide receivers. So the Jags are dead last in DVOA against the pass. They have the highest opponent passer rating by far. It's opponent passer rating is 110.2. And I think the next worst is like 102 something, just to give you an idea of how bad that is. The only quarterback in the league who has a higher passer rating than the Jags' opponent passer rating is Lamar Jackson at 116.3. So, and the Jags have given up the third most fantasy points to wide receivers. Ridley, he's been getting a pretty steady dose of targets. Since week 6, he's averaged 8.6 targets, 4.9 catches, and 76.9 receiving yards a game. So there's a pretty safe floor here. And against this defense, there is a lofty ceiling as well.
Let's go to another wide receiver debate. Marvin Harrison Jr. or Jerry Jeudy coming off of his 200-point explosion. Fitz, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, in Jameis Winston's 5 starts, Jeudy is averaging 9.8 targets, 6.6 catches, 122.8 receiving yards a game. Obviously, the 235-yard game against the Broncos on Monday night kind of skews the yardage number, but Jeudy has had at least 73 yards in all 5 of Winston's starts. But I definitely have concerns about Jeudy's matchup against Joey Porter Jr. And Jeudy did sort of get the better of Porter when they played a couple weeks ago. He had 6 targets, caught all of them for 85 yards. But the success he had in that game actually makes me more worried that this could be sort of a vengeance game for Joey Porter Jr. at home in Pittsburgh. It's not like I'm predicting a shutout here or anything, but I will confidently predict that Jerry Jeudy is going to have fewer than 235 receiving yards in this game against the Steelers. Marvin Harrison Jr., meanwhile, a season-high 12 targets last week, caught 5 of them for 60 yards and a touchdown. And this happened after Jonathan Gannon had talked to the media openly about wanting to get Harrison more involved in that game. So obviously, if you're a Harrison investor, you're hoping the uptick in usage sticks. And he certainly has a much easier matchup this week than Jeudy does. Harrison goes against the Seahawks, although Seattle did manage to hold Marvin Harrison Jr. to 3 catches for 47 yards a couple of weeks ago. I still think it's he's kind of sailing downwind here, and I think Jeudy is sailing upwind. I would rather start Harrison.
Yeah, you get a quote like that from Jonathan Gannon that, everybody saw Sunday morning about getting Harrison usage. You get 12 targets. You would have liked to have seen more than 5 catches for 60 yards given the quotes and the usage. But, with what you've gotten from Marvin Harrison Jr. this season, I suppose you can't complain about 60 yards and a touchdown. Even if I was, you kind of would have liked to see maybe a bigger explosion. Jeudy obviously did explode Erickson in that game, as we talked about. Fitz is planting his flag on Jerry Jeudy not getting 235 yards again. Are you going to go against him on that?
Well, the last time, again, I haven't fact checked this, but if memory serves me correct, the last time a Browns receiver went over 200, or actually it was Amari Cooper. So before Amari Cooper, the last Browns receiver that went over 200 receiving yards, Josh Gordon, went over 200 receiving yards the very next week. So, Fitz, be careful with this flag plant against Jerry Jeudy, especially against the Steelers, because we know this is a game where they're smelling blood between these two teams. So, I'm just going to ride with Jeudy. He's just been on fire. And again, 5 catches for 60 yards, that's been his floor, essentially, with Jameis Winston. And that's what we got as more volume, high targets for Marvin Harrison Jr., and we got 5 for 60. Obviously, he scored the touchdown. So I think both guys are strong plays this week, but I'm not benching Jeudy in any way, shape, or form. He's just on fire. And it doesn't, to me, having Jameis Winston as your quarterback makes these receivers almost matchup proof, right? Because, if they're going to drop back to throw 55 times, then Judy's going to find a way to get it done because he's going to see enough volume eventually, even if he is getting locked up at some point behind Joey Porter Jr. And give credit to Jeudy. I mean, he's playing really well. Like, it's not just because of Jameis Winston. Again, the combination is really working for these two players, but he's feeling confident. And I don't think that he's going to look back at that matchup against the Steelers in the snow and think, Joey Porter Jr. is going to get the best of me. Like, he was winning a lot of those matchups. And if Cedric Tillman returns, then will we see Joey Porter Jr. maybe on Cedric Tillman a little bit more too? So I'm not as concerned about Porter specifically. I'm going to roll in the flames with Jerry Jeudy.
Where do you guys have Jeudy ranked the rest of the season? His last 4 games on the schedule for the fantasy playoffs, because obviously that Ravens game is week 18. But his last 4 games for fantasy: Steelers, Chiefs, Bengals, and Dolphins. Steelers and Bengals are on the road. Chiefs and Dolphins are at home. So Erickson, is he somebody that should maybe be a bit higher than he is in ECR rest of the season?
Probably. I mean, I think he's probably should be in the top 24. I mean, he's a weekly start, I think, at this point with Jameis Winston. I don't think that you can really rank him. I mean, he's in ECR, I believe, he's a top 24 receiver this week, even with 6 teams on bye. I would assume that he's probably going to find his way at least into that conversation, because he's around a bunch of players that were kind of have more of the name cachet. Like he's around like 49ers receivers and some Bills receivers and Jets receivers. And it's like, yeah, like these guys should be producing, but like they're not. And then you have Jerry Jeudy, who's just on fire. So I think top 24 rest of the season is a good bet, especially with Winston. As long as they don't make a quarterback switch. Like that's the only concern, is that they decide, well, we're out of it. Let's give DTR some reps, and please don't do that to us, Browns.
He is outside of the top 24 in terms of rest of season. He's at ECR 28 in our rest of season rankings. Fitz, is that too high, too low, or just right?
Too low. I just moved him up to our wide receiver 24. And I realized I had last updated my rest of season rankings before the Monday night game against the Broncos, which certainly would have influenced things. So yeah, he needs to be higher. I've got him, wide receiver 24, and even that seems pretty conservative.
Say goodbye to start-sit dilemmas with FantasyPros Start-Sit Assistant. Within seconds, you'll know exactly who to play for optimal results each and every week. Leveraging insights from numerous experts, the Start-Sit Assistant aligns your lineup decisions with the top minds in fantasy football, giving you a competitive edge. Maximize your lineup's potential with just a few clicks. Head to fantasypros.com/myplaybook and make winning decisions in no time. All right, guys, we'll go to the rest of our start-sit decisions here. One more running back one. Isaac Guerendo or Aaron Jones? I know we talked about Guerendo already, but Fitz, I wanted to throw him out against a specific bigger name as well to kind of get a better sense of it. So Guerendo or Aaron Jones?
Guerendo. Big and fast, really good touch outlook, great matchup against a shaky Chicago Bears run defense. Tougher matchup for Jones against the Falcons, who've allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to running backs. And there's a chance that this ongoing fumbling issue with Aaron Jones could rear its ugly head again and cost him some playing time.
Erickson?
Yeah, I had Aaron Jones ranked higher heading into prep for the show, but I think that Fitz has kind of convinced me to go in a different direction. Guerendo's matchup is really good, and Aaron Jones is one of these running backs that I feel like I've been concerned about his season-long outlook since the middle of the year, right? Where they're just loading up with so many touches. He seems like he's continuously banged up. The fumbles, they're getting Cam Akers more involved. He seems much more of a fragile type of play this week, even though you look, again, the Falcons, right, this should be good, but the Falcons defense played really well last week. They shut down the Chargers. So, yeah, I think that at this point of the year, we wouldn't be surprised if some of these older running backs, maybe the wheels start to fall off, where Guerendo, man, dude's got fresh legs. And he's going to be going up against a Bears defense that, I mean, who knows what kind of effort we're going to get. I know they've fired Eberflus. Maybe this is the moment that they show up and decide to finally stop the run, or maybe it's just like, hey, we don't really care. This guy's really fast and we can't tackle him. So, I think I'm going to have to move Jones down. Probably at least I have to move Guerendo up. I got rookie numbers on Isaac Guerendo, so I got to move him up the ranks.
All right, let's stick with the Niners for this wide receiver one, and we'll stick with the Niners for both players here. Erickson, Deebo Samuel or Jauan Jennings this week?
Jauan Jennings. He's just been better all season. And I get the matchup probably calls for, well, this is a week where Deebo is going to get more scheme touches with McCaffrey. I feel like I've been thinking that every single game this year, where they're going to get Deebo more scheme touches and they just never do. And it's him. Deebo Samuel gets his touches on kickoff returns. Like that's how they're using Deebo Samuel. So the Bears are a tougher matchup against number one wide receivers. And that's kind of where I think Jennings is going to be used, just because he's taken over that X role for Ayuk. But he's good. And with him and Brock Purdy, they've been firing more often than not this year. So I'm just going to trust the guy that has outproduced Deebo Samuel basically every single week, it seems. So I don't love either 49ers guy this week per se, because I don't love the matchup against the Bears pass defense. But I'm just going to roll with Jennings because he's been better all year. And I just haven't seen enough from Deebo to have the confidence to without McCaffrey, he'll get more touches. But, we could have made that argument so many weeks and they just haven't done it. So I'm going to go with Jennings.
Fitz, how do you see it? They're only 2 spots apart in our staff rankings.
I'm actually going with Deebo here, and I know it has been a rough go for Deebo investors. He is wide receiver 47 in half-point PPR fantasy points per game. He's produced fewer than 5 fantasy points in each of his last 3 games. So the thing is, I think this is the week where they are sort of forced to get him more involved. I think he is going to be the complementary back to Isaac Guerendo rather than Patrick Taylor Jr. or the recently acquired Isiah Banakanda. So I think there's a good chance he gets like 6 to 8 carries in this game. Hopefully a little more usage as a pass catcher too. And it's not like Jauan Jennings has been knocking it out of the park recently either. 8 catches for 96 yards and no touchdowns over his last 2 games. Although I don't know, maybe we give the whole San Francisco passing game a mulligan in that snow game against Buffalo. But I think it's Deebo. I think Deebo goes back to sort of the usage he had a couple seasons ago where he was getting a lot of run as a ball carrier. And maybe that finally gets him cooking again.
Let's look at some flex options here. Fitz, Rico Dowdle coming off of a strong game, or Malik Nabers.
Oh, man, this one's hard because I love Nabers, but I think Rico's just a much safer play. The Cowboys now seem pretty fully committed to him as their lead running back, and he's a good matchup against the Bengals. I just don't want to be in the Drew Lock business, is basically what it comes down to, if I can help it. And unfortunately, starting Malik Nabers means you're in the Drew Lock business.
Yeah, it's a shit, man. Early on in the, and we talked about it on our Dynasty check-in, Fitz, like early on in the year, we were talking about Nabers, like he's just a hair behind that Jefferson, Chase, Lamb tier for Dynasty managers. You know, even in redraft, it looked like a rest of season, like he looked like a top 5 guy.
Yeah, since the concussion, he has averaged, I believe, under 6 yards per target, which is pretty bad.
Yeah. Erickson, what do you think about this one? Malik Nabers or Dowdle, who had over 100 yards in that Thursday game?
Yeah, I think the only way that you could convince me to move Nabers ahead of Dowdle would have to be full PPR, because when you have these backup quarterbacks and you need 12, 13, 14, 15 targets, because half of them are not going to be catchable, right? And they're not going to be for a lot of yards. So it has to be full PPR. And even that I don't feel like great about, because I think Dowdle, he's playing the Bengals. I think their run defense is kind of underrated, but just their defense as a whole is just bad. So like Dallas is going to have opportunities to score. Again, what game scores more points? Dallas Bengals or Giants Saints in MetLife Stadium, where totals go to die? I think you just got to play the Dallas Cowboy running back. He's been good, and this Giants Saints game, I feel like it could be very underwhelming.
Erickson, you always say that Ford Field is the Coors Field of the NFL. Yeah. What's MetLife Stadium? What's their stadium? What is
the worst ballpark for home runs? Polo Grounds?
Yeah, the Polo Grounds. That's a good one. All right, Fitz. Nick Chubb or Darnell Mooney this week?
I'm going with Mooney. Good matchup against the Vikings, who have allowed the most fantasy points to wide receivers. Although I do worry that Mooney could potentially be derailed by the slumping Kirk Cousins. But there is big play potential with Mooney, at least. There's very little big play potential with Nick Chubb, who his longest run in his 5 games since coming back from injury has been 15 yards. Chubb is averaging 45.7 yards per game from scrimmage since his return, and you pretty much need him to fall into the end zone for him to pay off in fantasy. So I'm going with Mooney.
Erickson, Chubb, or Mooney?
Mooney for me too. Again, Vikings, they give up a lot of volume. Like, that's the thing that we need to keep in mind. And that's what we need to get these receivers to get fantasy points. Like, they face a ton of passing attempts. So I think Darnell Mooney is going to see a ton of volume. The Vikings, specifically against number 2 receivers, allowing the 4th most receiving yards per game. And we look up how the Falcons have scored a lot of their touchdowns this year and how the Vikings have given up touchdowns. It's the highest combined rate of passing touchdown percentage on offense against passing touchdown percentage allowed on defense. So when the Falcons score, it's most likely going to be through the air to one of these receivers, which includes Darnell Mooney. So yeah, I think Mooney has way more upside than Nick Chubb this week.
How about Erickson, Jaylen Warren, or Jaylen Waddle?
I think I'm just going to roll the dice with Jaylen Waddle. Honestly, the Jets are reeling. Sauce Gardner is banged up, and 2 games last year against the Jets defense, Waddle went over 100 yards in both games. Now, Tyreek Hill didn't play in either of those games, so that is the caveat. But I look at Jaylen Warren versus Jaylen Waddle and think, their floors are probably pretty similar. If you just look at their box scores the last couple of weeks, Warren is scoring 7 to 9.5 PPR points per game. Waddle is a little bit lower at 5 to 7, but Waddle has a ceiling, right? Like, he can catch a long touchdown, and the Jets defense is a team that, hey, I think that the Dolphins can cook in this game, playing at home where they usually beat up on bad teams. The Jets are a bad team, and I could see Miami kind of putting up a lot of points on a divisional rival. So I like Jaylen Waddle for the ceiling because I think that the floors are probably pretty similar.
Fitz, they're back-to-back in ECR flex rankings this week in half PPR. Which Jaylen Watt do you prefer?
So I both agree and disagree with Erickson here. I think in a neutral situation, I'm going with Jaylen Waddle. He's the more talented and more accomplished player. But I do think he has that Jaylen Warren actually has a slightly safer floor. Like we have seen with the Dolphins wide receivers that the floor isn't particularly safe this year. So, I know the Sauce injury changes the outlook a little bit, but the Jets have still been a pretty tough matchup for wide receivers this year. So, if I was looking for a safe floor, I think I'd lean towards Warren. But if I needed a ceiling, I would go with Waddle. And in a neutral situation, I think I'd go with Waddle.
One more flex here, Erickson. Amir Abdullah or Adam Thielen coming off of his nice game and Bryce Young playing better?
Adam Thielen for me. I think that he's clearly the number one receiver for the Carolina Panthers. He's Bryce Young's guy from last year where he was really productive. And he's relatively fresh because he missed so many games to start the year. I get that the matchup is horrible against the Eagles, but I think that him against Abdullah, who I don't really know exactly what his role is going to be. Looks like McCormick is going to take on a bigger role as a rusher. Alexander Mattison was limited in Wednesday's practice. So does he return? And also Amir Abdullah, he's been a journeyman for so long. Like the Raiders, I think, are trying to find ways to get other guys involved if they can, like we saw last week when we saw his snaps reduced dramatically from the first game he played without Zamir White and Alexander Mattison active. So Thielen may not have a high ceiling this week because of the brutal matchup against the Eagles, but I think that he's a safe bet for a solid volume, and maybe he finds the end zone. So I'll go with Thielen.
Fitz?
Erickson laid this one out really well. Abdullah's short-lived fantasy value stemmed pretty much entirely from his usage in early down situations, which just, that was a one-off. Like that was a one-time thing. Now they're going to give Sincere McCormick some more run, and they are probably getting Alexander Mattison back. He was back at practice on a limited basis on Wednesday. So Abdullah he wasn't fantasy relevant when he was just the Raiders passing down back. And now it seems like he's back to being just the passing down back.
Let's look at a quarterback here. How about Justin Herbert or Tua Tagovailoa? Fitz, who do you like here?
It's Herbert for me. And I know the Chiefs look like a tough matchup, but the Chiefs always seem to bring out the best in Justin Herbert for whatever reason. In 8 career games against Kansas City, Herbert has averaged 273 passing yards a game, 2.1 touchdown passes, and he's also had 3 touchdown runs against the Chiefs in his career. His career passer rating against KC, 101.5. So he just the Chiefs light the fire under Justin Herbert. And I'm not really worried about the Chargers being run heavy and Herbert not getting enough attempts because the Chargers aren't going to move the ball if they lean on Gus Edwards slamming into the Chiefs' brick wall run defense. So Herbert's going to get volume. I think I will say there is one caveat, and it's Ladd McConkey's status. If Ladd is scratched before Sunday and we know he's going to be out, then I would pivot to Tua because, if it's no Ladd, then we're talking about a pass catching group of Will Dissly, Josh Palmer, and Quentin Johnston. So that would swing me towards Tua. But for now, I'm going with Herbert over Tua.
Erickson, what do you think? Herbert coming off his worst game of the year, and he had been on a nice run. His finish at the position since week 8 has been QB 9, QB 12, QB 8, QB 8, QB 12. He'd been really consistently a back end QB 1, and then he was QB 30 in what looked like a pretty good matchup against Atlanta. So do you like him or Tua this week?
I like Tua. This is a great spot for Miami Dolphins to just roll. That's kind of how I'm seeing it. They're playing the Jets at home, big home favorites, and this is a spot where they deliver again. Last week was the week to fade the Dolphins at all costs, and somehow Tua still got there with garbage time points at the end. I think that they're going to blow the Jets out of the water, and I think that you're going to see Tua have a pretty strong game as a result. So, the Ladd McConkey thing concerns me because even if he's active, is this man, is he going to be able to take another 12 targets and another beating? Because he's still getting looked at the shoulder injury that he's been dealing with the last couple of weeks. So again, came out of the gates in the first half, was not a factor in the second half of the Chiefs or the Chargers game last week because he was banged up. So I have concerns about if the Chiefs throw everything at Ladd McConkey, then it's Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer that we're relying on to get Herbert over the hump with fantasy points. And I'm concerned with that versus Miami, who is flurry of weapons against the Jets defense that, hey, like they want to go home. Like they're checking the tee times in January. So I'm going to roll with Tua.
Do we think that Ladd McConkey would lose any of his quickness if they sent him out in like knight's armor for this game? Because I think he might need that.
I would love to see him try. Tight end here, Cade Otton or Evan Ingram, Erickson?
Evan Ingram for me, just because I think that he's going to see more volume. I know Otton has a good matchup this week, but we've seen Otton's targets kind of decrease since Mike Evans' return. I mean, Baker Mayfield is no longer looking for Cade Otton immediately. He's looking for Mike Evans immediately. And so Evans came up with the injury report with the hamstring thing. I think it's just rest because something he's been dealing with. But I think that matters, that Otton has not been as involved as he was with all the receivers injured. So for me, I get it's Mac Jones. It's gross, but he should see volume. I think Ingram has a higher floor, especially in full PPR. So I will go with Evan Ingram.
Fitz?
Close call. I have Ingram ranked one spot higher, but I do see this as another floor versus ceiling thing. Over his last 4 games, Ingram is averaging 8.5 targets, 5.8 catches, with at least 7 targets and 5 receptions in each of those games. So there is a floor here. The problem is that Ingram hasn't finished with more than 45 receiving yards in any of those games. He's averaging 6.7 yards per catch over that stretch. 6.7. That's like worse than a running back's per catch average. And he's only scored 1 touchdown all season. So yes, in the 2 games since the return of Mike Evans, Otton has 5 catches for 50 yards. But as Erickson mentioned, like Evans might not be totally healthy. I think it's more than just the hamstring. I think he has a calf problem that crept up on him too. So, like if Evans were scratched, then this would definitely vault Otton past Ingram for me. Right now, I've got Ingram 1 spot higher, but if I were looking for a ceiling, I think I'd probably still go with Otton over Ingram just because, Ingram he's just this short area guy right now. And that's it. There's just not any big yardage upside with him.
We've got our touchdown calls contest to wrap things up. I'm at running back this week. Tony Pollard. We talked about this game a bit. Jags stink. Not overthinking it. Just taking a running back there. So Tony Pollard for me. Erickson, who's your wide receiver?
Darnell Mooney. We talked about him a little bit earlier in one of these start-sit decisions. I think the Falcons are going to have a good game here. I like them. I like the Falcons. I think Kirk Cousins is going to bounce back. Remember that you like that game? Well, it's coming back here in 2024 for Kirk Cousins. So flag planting all of the Atlanta Falcons players to bounce back. Kirk Cousins is not going to lose his job. So yeah, give me the Falcons. Give me Darnell Mooney, score a touchdown.
A friend of mine that I used to work with at NBC Sports Washington, it might have been Comcast Sportsnet at the time. She was the one in the room that Kirk said, "You like that too," when he walked past. She was the recipient of the "you like that" when he was all hyped after that game. That's her claim to fame. Tight end, Fitz, who you got?
Grant Calcaterra of the Philadelphia Eagles, who I've ranked tight end 15 this week. It looks like Dallas Goedert is very unlikely to play. Calcaterra faces a Carolina Panthers defense that's given up a league-high 9 touchdown catches to tight ends. And this is certainly wishful thinking on my part because the Bipocalypse is forcing me to start Grant Calcaterra in the Scott Fishbowl playoffs. And I think Travis Homer came up in conversation earlier with all the Bears running back injuries. I also picked up Travis Homer just in case and might start him in the Scott Fishbowl playoffs. So we are really scraping the bottom of the barrel here in the Bipocalypse in the Scott Fishbowl.
All right, so we got Tony Pollard, Darnell Mooney, and Grant Calcaterra for our touchdown calls contest. We'll wrap up there. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And best of luck, not just in Week 14, but in making the fantasy playoffs. Hope everything goes your way. Thank you so much for being with us throughout the fantasy regular season. We're not going anywhere the next month of the season, though. For Erickson and Fitz, I'm Ryan Wormeli. We'll see you again next week.